platform. And I'm a director in the business intelligence and analytics practice. So I lead a team. We have, in the BI&A practice, we have about 50 individuals. Actually, we've expanded a little bit. I'm not quite sure what our head count is, but we've expanded our team recently. And we're part of the data analytics team, which is around 200 people who are entirely focused on modern data warehouse and data solutions, again, completely around Azure and Power BI and the Microsoft data ecosystem. So you're welcome to reach out to me. I try to pay attention to Twitter. I don't always have time for social media, but I do my best to at least keep up when, if you link with me or visit my blog, you can ask questions out there, but can't promise to be real responsive. I do have a day job. This slide is completely to remind me what I signed up to talk about. So we're going to talk, everything I'm going to show you is going to be paginated reports in the Power BI service. As you all know, Paginated Reports really is SQL Server reporting services brought to the Power BI service. That doesn't mean that we have absolute parity between the products, but it really is based on the same technology and the same feature set for the most part. And we're going to talk specifically about why you would want to use Power BI Datasets as your data source for your paginated reports. And why you may not want to use Power BI datasets and really what that decision criteria is. So let's start by talking about Power BI as a reporting tool. And so when I refer to Power BI reports, I'm referring to Power BI interactive reports that you would create with Power BI Desktop or create reports in the web experience within the Power BI portal to create, dashboard style reports. The word dashboard has particular meaning within the Power BI ecosystem, but the reports that we create generally are visual, they're interactive. We can create scorecards and dashboard style reports. And this is generally used for an analytic experience where we're summarizing data and we're presenting aggregate results in the form of measures, and then users interact with those reports to gain insights and to get deeper questions answered, as opposed to operational reports. What do we mean by that? If we kind of teleport back in time, most of you are probably younger than I am, but there was a time when somebody said, I need that report. What they meant is, I'd like to go print a report. And I remember a time in my career and when I was kind of growing up with computers, when you printed a report, it was printed on green bar paper on a pin-fed continuous scroll of paper in a dot matrix printer or an impact printer. And eventually we graduated to laser printers and inkjet printers and whatnot. But reports were all about printing stuff on paper, and eventually we kind of graduated to viewing it in a web browser and maybe exporting to Excel or a PDF or some other format. But these were operational reports, and an operational report, for the most part, is a list of stuff. And it might be grouped, there may be some subtotals, but for the most part, when we're talking about operational reports, we're talking about lists of transactions, shipping manifests, invoices, maybe labels or badges, but it's just a list of stuff in a particular format, as opposed to a single page in a web browser that a user interacts with. And kind of one of the characteristics of operational reports is that you usually have multiple pages, whether they're printed or you navigate from one page to another, thus the term paginated report. So there's a real stark difference between those two concepts, yet there's a lot of overlap in between, as depicted in this diagram. So here's a quick history lesson. I grew up with this product. I used it before it was released. I will admit here, and Cookie's a good friend, but she works for Microsoft. So Um, I will admit that the first version of SQL Server reporting services that I used was a bootlegged copy of the alpha release, a very early release of reporting services back in 2003. A friend of mine slipped me a CD that he got from a friend of a friend at Microsoft and said, Paul, you ought to check this out. And I fell in love with reporting services. And then it was finally released early in 2004. I was so impressed with it that I actually reached out to some friends at Microsoft and I arranged to have lunch with the product team, the initial team that developed this product. The group program manager's name was Jason Carlson, and he led a team of about 20, 25 people who developed this product, and the rest is history. It shipped with SQL Server for SQL Server 2000. So if we kind of look at this history, it was a mature product at its time, but it was based on technology that really was circa 2003. So it was all web-based web services, all rendering in HTML, etc., all optimized and based on SQL Server for the most part. So I did something a little more modern. I went out and I asked ChatGPT to write a short paragraph explaining the history of SQL Server reporting services and Power BI paginated reports. And this is what it kicked back. And ChatGTP really is kind of an advanced web search. It's a smart AI-based bot that goes out and gathers up information on the web. And it says, well, reporting services has evolved over the years. It's undergone several updates, but it was really about creating pixel-perfect print-ready reports that could be exported in various formats. And then paginated reports is the next evolution of SQL Server reporting services. Well, circa 2017, Power BI was brought to reporting services in what's called the Power BI Report Server. And then 2019, the opposite happened. Reporting services was brought to the Power BI service, and that's really our focus today. So as a reporting tool, how do we think about the difference between Power BI as an interactive report tool and reporting services or paginated reports? And this is how I think about the difference. Power BI is a Tesla. It's modern, it's automatic, it just works, it's optimized, it's very inexpensive in terms of the way that it uses resources. And reporting services and paginated reports is an old muscle car. It's cool, it's big, it's heavy, it's a little kludgy in ways. It's not real good on gas, but there's a heck of a lot you can do with it because it's been around for a long time. So, analogies break down over time, but I'm kind of a car guy, so this is the way I view the two tools. All right. So what data sources can we use with different report types? So if you work with Power BI, you know that behind every report is a data model, a semantic data model. With the exception of using features like direct query, that data gets cached in memory, and it's typically organized in a dimensional star schema. In fact, Power BI really wants data organized in a star schema. And we can organize most data in a star schema, but there's some types of data, some structures of data, and some reporting scenarios requiring data that doesn't fit really well into a star schema. And so if we can get 90 or 95% of our data into a star schema and build a semantic data model, then that model can be used to surface data for both Power BI interactive reports as well as paginated reports or long list type reports. But if you have transactional details, big wide tables with a lot of text, that stuff may not fit very well into a semantic model. So this is where we have a decision point. What do you put all of the data that you need into a data model published as a Power BI data set and then use that for your paginated report data source? Or do you use SQL queries and go back to the native source, whether that's a data warehouse or a data mart, a data lake, or maybe even a system of record. So those are kind of the big decision points, and it's the reason that a lot of us make the big bucks, because these are not always real easy decisions to make as you're architecting a solution. All right. And I'm looking at James' comment here. I think of the muscle car analogy as particularly apt, especially since you can do some really cool custom stuff with SSRS. Yes, I agree. And there are a number of custom extensions and things that you can use. So the query languages that a lot of us have grown up with in using reporting services. Now, you can use reporting services or paginated reports with a lot of different data sources, just like we can use Power BI with a lot of different types of data. But just thinking about the Microsoft ecosystem and what reporting services and paginated reports was optimized to work with, obviously SQL Server was the first choice. Reporting services was architected around SQL Server and Transact SQL queries. That's its sweet spot. That's where all of the features grew up. And that's what it works best with. As time went on, and as SQL Server analysis services matured, remember back in the day, analysis services put data on disk in a multidimensional fashion, what we would call analysis services cubes. And the native language of SQL Server analysis services was MDX, or multidimensional expressions. So in 2008-ish, reporting services was expanded and features were added, and a query designer was created to be able to write MDX queries. And it didn't do MDX quite as well as it did SQL, but it did MDX pretty well. And then as the platform expanded, I think a lot of our friends at Microsoft realized that MDX was a pretty niche skill. And today we might refer to it as a legacy skill. It's not a language that people new in their careers are generally going to learn, but the language of Power BI is DAX, which is primarily a function-based calculation language, and then secondarily, it's a query language. It's a very, very verbose query language. But if you're creating measures in a Power BI model, you're going to write measures that may be quite simple, but the queries that are issued against the tabular model to be able to surface Power BI reports can be very verbose and can be a little complicated. So the designer within paginated reports, and you kind of look at these three languages, we can do all kinds of things in SQL, and everybody understands SQL. SQL is the first thing that you learn. And it's easy to process, it's easy to understand. Most database professionals think in SQL first. MDX, not so much, a little more specialized. I grew up with MDX, which means that I can write pretty elegant MDX. It's pretty natural for me, but that's not true of people who didn't grow up with it. DAX, not so much. So the designer's really not optimized for DAX nearly as much as it's been optimized for the other two languages. So keep that in mind as I start doing some demonstrations. So why use paginated reports? Well, if you have transactional details, lists of stuff, you need to get down to the transactional detail. That's going to produce a lot of pages. That may be a better choice for paginated reports than Power BI interactive reports. Wide, non-dimensional tables, not a good idea in a Power BI data set. So that data may not belong in a Power BI data model or data set, and therefore it may be better to go back to the data source and build a paginated report off of that data. Long text fields, long-running list type reports, multiple pages, highly formatted layouts where it needs to be pixel perfect and you need to be able to control the margins, things like that. Again, paginated reports may be a better choice. Printable or exportable to many formats. One of the most popular formats is PDF, because you can both print PDF and you know exactly what the page parameters are for PDF. And of course, everybody wants to export to Excel, and that may not necessarily be the right thing to do, but when our users insist on it, and that's where they want their data, you can use paginated reports to export to Excel. All right, when not to use paginated reports. So when users need to ask additional questions, when they need to explore results and interact, so when a user looks at a report and they say, oh, okay, there's my monthly profit number. Where did that come from? How does that break down by region? How does that break down by my, sales reps and within the sales organization? If the initial report doesn't answer that question, then they need to drill down. They need to drill through. They need to interact. And that may be a better experience in Power BI than in paginated reports. When they're browsing, they're exploring, they need to interact, they want to gain insights. They need to be able to parameterize and be able to filter results. And generally, when values or measure values are being visualized and grouped and summarized, Power BI is usually the better choice for that kind of thing. All right, so what's this? This is a big wide table. And when you have a result set that looks like this that you need to report on, don't import that into a Power BI data model. This is where paginated reports really kind of is the sweet spot. So again, keep that in mind. I kind of cherry picked this from a presentation I did last November at the Past Data Community Summit on using Power BI with large data sets. And this was one of the big takeaways is don't do this with Power BI. Paginated reports can be the better way to do this. And I need to do a time check. Okay, we're right at the half hour. So within the paginated report builder, the query designer really has three different modes. Now, if you're connected to a relational data source, such as SQL Server on-prem or Azure SQL or Synapse Analytics SQL, that query designer is going to render T-SQL, and it's a very, very mature query designer. If you're connected to a Power BI data set, or to an analysis services tabular data model, then the designer is going to look like this. And it's capable of emitting one of two different languages, either DAX. Here's an example. This is a very simple example of a DAX query that would be produced from the query designer. And this is an example of an MDX query. Now, these are not the same queries. This one is obviously a little more complex. And that doesn't mean that MDX queries are that much more verbose than DAX queries. These just happen to be two convenient queries that I was able to grab. So let's take a look at how we can get started creating a paginated report from the service. So I'm going to go grab my browser window, wherever it is, right there. Let's bring that down to the desktop that I'm sharing. And I'm going to move over to a workspace where I have some published data sets. This was the presentation that I did at the Past Data Community Summit. And I'm just going to pick one of my data sets here. So this is a published Power BI data set. And if I click on the little ellipsis button, the three dots, you can see that one of the options is that I can create a paginated report. Now, let me pause here just a second. This is how you get started creating or connecting to and creating a paginated report based on a published data set. It is possible to open up Power BI Report Builder and connect, but you have to do that as an analysis services connection using the XMLA endpoint. And this is the more convenient way to do thing. It's a little black box in the approach in that it just generates an object that you can't really pick apart. But this is a real convenient way to do that. So I'm just going to say create a paginated report, and I get this very simple web designer experience. This designer is fairly new. It's not extremely feature laden. I think this is going to mature probably pretty rapidly because I know that the product team are working pretty aggressively on expanding this, but it's a good way to get started building some simple paginated reports. So let's just do that really quickly. So I'm going to let's group by year. Now you can see that because when I designed this data model, I didn't set this numeric year column to not summarize. I have a little sigma here. I have to go fix that. So I'm going to say this is just like in Power BI. Don't summarize that. Let's go get our product category. So I'll add the category name. And again, this is just a very simple example. So I'm just going to grab one of my measures, combined sales amount quantity right there. Okay, so uber simple report. But what I can do is I can actually publish or download this report right now. And by downloading it, I actually have access to that data source that was generated for me. So this was a little bit of a cooking show demo where I'm taking you to a downloaded copy of this report. You can see that I have this data source. And now I could go, stripped out the data set, so I'll go build another one. So I'm going to go add a data set, and I'm going to use the designer to build this data set because I'm using a Power BI dataset as a data source. When I click on the Query Designer button, it's going to take me to that DAX or MDX Query Designer. Give it a second to warm up. Go away, Snagit. I don't want you. All right, there we go. Now, I want to make sure that I'm in DAX mode here because I can build either query language. And let's just do some quick dragging and dropping. I'll do the same thing that I did before. I'll start with that measure. And let's see, we had done the year. There's my year. I want to park that before my measure, and then my product category. All right. It doesn't automatically run the queries because that can be real heavy. Now, the one thing that I can do here that I can't do in the web designer is I can create parameters and I can set default filter values. So let's do that. I'm just going to pick my store country. We'll go down to the store table. And I'll grab the region country name and pull that up into, excuse me, my dimensions. And I will set some defaults. Let's say that Canada and US are going to be my defaults. Now, as part of the query designer experience that you wouldn't know if you didn't grow up with this tool. For some reason in the designer, these checkboxes aren't labeled. And this first checkbox just means I want to create a parameter from this filter. Without it being checked, it's just a filter inside the query. When I check it, it's going to generate a parameter. I don't even remember what the second one is for, but we don't need to worry about it. All right, let's go run that. I lost my filter expression. Let's try to do this again. Know if that happened when I checked the box, if it forgot my defaults, but this is kind of indicative of the lack of full maturity that this designer is. You have to kind of double check yourself, and things get lost, and it's a tool that you have to kind of be one with and understand its idiosyncrasies. It's a good tool once you get some practice. There's my query, and let's hit OK to capture the query. What we should see is that it will build a parameter that will show up over here. Go ahead and click OK. Yeah, there was my parameter. So you can see that it built the parameter. It built a hidden data set. There's actually another data set out here that it built that it hid that drives the parameter list. But if we go back and take a look at the data set properties, I want to show you the DAX that that this generated. And I'm just going to format that DAX a little bit just to make it a little easier to read. And I want to point out something kind of magical that that the query designer did. The parameterization of multi-value parameters in DAX is a complicated thing. And in the MDX world, it would have actually generated a bunch of extra code, but all of that code would have been present here in the designer, in the query. The DAX designer doesn't do that. It actually uses a little built-in filter. And this is part of the Power BI report builder designer and supported by the service. There's this custom function that's built in that we pass the parameter information into, and it goes and builds out the filter expression for us. You'll never get to see that filter expression because it's wrapped up inside this custom function. Okay, so that's the DAX experience. I'm not going to take a lot of extra time with this because I want to take you to some other things. But I have a published copy of this report. I'm going to go ahead and abandon that because I don't want to save it. Let me take you to the published copy of this report just so you can see that I've finished this. So there's my Paginated Report Playground. And so there's a fleshed out copy of the report. Oh, that one doesn't have the parameter. Let me go back. And I believe that that's this one. All right, so I had parameterized the year rather than the country, but you can see that it is in fact a multi-select parameter, and that does feed the query. Now, if you're more comfortable kind of rolling your own queries and you want to have a little more control, MDX is still supported and it works quite well against Power BI data models. So remember that a Power BI, I'm using the term data set and data model as simultaneous terms. That can be a little confusing because here in Paginated Reports, we call queries data sets, but the Power BI product team chose to refer to a published data model also as a data set, a completely different meaning. Against a Power BI published data set. That data set is actually exposed as an analysis services tabular database. And analysis services, whether multidimensional or tabular, still supports MDX. So if you know your way around MDX and you want to be able to do some more advanced things, perhaps with parameters, you can continue to use MDX. When you browse a tabular model with Excel, Excel emits MDX. MDX is still completely supported, even though it's really kind of viewed as more of a legacy language. So I'm not going to walk through the whole experience. Essentially, we would use the same query designer. We would just switch from DAX to MDX. You could drag and drop, create a query, and that query is going to look something like this. Okay. And we're not going to get into the nuances of how MDX works. MDX is kind of based on the principles of tuples and hierarchies. And I'll stop there because I used to teach classes and read books about MDX, and it's a very elegant language. I'm sorry that it's destined to become a dead language. But there are a lot of things that I love about MDX. And when Chris Webb presents to you next month, I know that Chris loves MDX. A lot of us who grew up with these languages still embrace MDX. It's a very elegant language. But I just wanted to point out the filtering expressions here. We can pass a multi-value parameter into an MDX function called string to set. And that string to set function will essentially take the string representation of a multi-value parameter selection and will turn it into a set that it can then use as a filter. Now, if what I just said is Greek to you and you don't know a thing about MDX, forget it. Don't worry about it. But just know that there's just a lot of goodness that can come from having this capability. So let me pause there and see if we have questions so far. Graham, thank you. The second parameter tick box is when you select a range inclusive or exclusive. Thank you. It's been years since I've dealt with that, and I vaguely remember that option back in the day when you could actually see the titling on those two check boxes. Any other questions about using DAX or MDX? Okay. So cases where it makes sense to use a Power BI data set as your data source, other than the convenience of just being able to hit the same data source without having to rewrite queries, and you don't necessarily need to add wide columns. Sorry, my dogs are outside barking. They hear me talking and they're going to make noise. I know that Teams is pretty good about muting background noise, but it's distracting to me. Another reason where it would make sense to use that published data set as a data source is if you have row-level security implemented. So any tool, any report, or any tool that you use to connect to that published data set is going to be aware of the user's credentials because the user has to authenticate. Therefore, row-level security will just work. It'll work in Excel, it'll work in a paginated report, it'll work in a reporting services report or a paginated report. If RLS isn't a consideration, and you do need to support wide tables or transactional details that aren't present in your published data set, then it might make more sense to go back to the SQL data source. And let's take a look at how we do this. Now, I'm not only going to show you how I might create a SQL-based query, I'm also going to show you how I can create a drill-through experience from a Power BI interactive report to a related paginated report. So I'm going to jump over to my Past Summit workspace again and show you that here I have my published data set. Here I have my Power BI interactive report. And up here, I have a paginated report. Now let's just go run the Power BI report. And here you can see that I have a simple matrix. We can visualize this any way that we want. But at the intersection of a year and or a month and a product category, I've got a link. And that link, if I click it, so this is January 2022 for computers, I'm going to click that link. And that is going to take me to a paginated report that will show me the inventory for computers 2022 in January. I happen to have hundreds of thousands of products in inventory at any point in time. So as you can see, I'm fetching many, many rows of data. And that means that I'm going to have many, many pages in my paginated report. There's no way that I could do an inventory, a running list of all of my products in a Power BI interactive report. So I'm pulling back 48,000 records that are in 1,400 pages. So again, computers, January 2022, 48,000 records, 1,400 pages. This was the perfect way to present this information. So how did I do that? So let's go. I'm going to go back to my Past Summit presentation folder to open up those reports. So the paginated report, 06. Paginated report is here. Also open up Power BI Desktop. All right, so here's the paginated report. The data source is my Azure SQL database, Contoso DW. My data set is a T-SQL data set. Just show it to you here. I'm using a view, so it's a very simple query. I'm just saying select star from this view, VW inventory details. Not running Zoom It. Let me run Zoom It real quick. There we go. All right, select star from VW inventory details. That could be a whole SQL query. It could be select these columns from this table, inner join that table, left join another table, etc. Where let's ignore that for now, where the product category name field equals my product category and the year equals my year parameter and the month equals my month parameter. So I'm passing 3 different parameters. I'm always going to have a single value because I'm doing the drill through thing. I'm always going to have a single value. So I'm not worrying about multi-select values. I could do that using an in function. There are all kinds of techniques that we can use to make this a little more versatile. But the purpose of this report is to do this drill through. Okay, so now I have this published report and I can pass those parameters in the URL, in the query string part of the URL. So let's switch back to Power BI Desktop. And now we're in Power BI land. I have a small table that uses a Power Query parameter to hold the path to that report. So what I did is I published the paginated report into the Power BI service. I went and ran the report and I grabbed the URL. I stripped out the parameters. And that value is right here. And I surface this as a measure. And then I go build another measure called inventory report link. And that measure looks like this. I have some variables. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go get that path that I just showed you. The next thing I'm going to do is go build my product category part of the URL string and say, I want to run this report, question mark RP, as in report parameter. The parameter name is product category, and I'm concatenating the selected value of my category name because I'm grouping on category and I have that value present. Then I'm doing the same thing with the year and I'm doing the same thing with the month. I just concatenate the whole thing together into a URL. And if we hover, you'll see the URL that I just generated, and you'll see that it has RP colon product category equals the name of my category, ampersand RP equals year. In this case, I'm not at the year level, so it's passing a -1. If I were at the year level, then you would see 2002. My month is all. I've got some magic behind my report that's able to figure out if I'm at the year level or the month level. But when I click, it navigates again to that paginated report in the service. And the reason, again, that I'm using a paginated report with a SQL query is that this is based on a big, wide transaction table that I don't want to have to put into my Power BI data model. It would bloat the model. It would slow things down. I don't otherwise need to report on the data in that table. So the paginated report was a perfect choice to do that. Now I'm getting the best of both worlds with my interactive report developed in Power BI Desktop based on a published data set, and my paginated report based on a big old wide table as a result of that view that is transactional in nature, a lot of details that I don't need to aggregate and summarize. I just want to see them in a report. And that brings us to the end presentation. Get back here. And so again, here's this Power BI interactive report, and then the drill through to the paginated report. So with that, that was my demo. Any queries? And by that, I mean any questions. And I see that we actually have quite a few queued up. So I'm going to scroll up just to make sure that I catch these in order. All right. Rohit, I believe responding to Luis. All right. I think this was just an interaction between Luis and Rohit. If there is a question in there that I haven't caught,
I think James asked a question.
Okay, I'm scrolling down. All right, James, in 3 paragraphs. Someone asked me recently if it would be possible to pass XML formatted tabular data from a column in a report data set as a parameter to a sub-report. By sub-report, do you mean a drill-through report? I'm guessing that it's not a sub-report. Then have the sub-report use that incoming tabular data as a data set and render the tabular data as detail rows. Okay, I get what you're asking. I'm going to give you a conditional, yeah, I think that's possible, but I think we would have to get deep in the weeds to figure this out. Okay. I recall a I'm going to go way off topic here and say, yes, I believe that's possible. This actually reminds me of a technique that a friend of mine used. It wasn't necessarily a drill through action with a parameter, but bear with me just a second. I'm going to go look something up. Stacia Varga wrote a recipe that was included in our last Paginated Report recipe ebook, which is available to download from my blog. I'm going to go find this before I share it with you. I'll pull this browser window down here so you can see what I'm doing. She didn't use XML, she used JSON, but it was really the same kind of thing. And I think this might kind of be in the category of what you're trying to do. Parsing multi-value parameters using OpenJSON. And yes. So, James, you're welcome to speak up and let me know if I've either missed the boat entirely or if this is categorically what you're asking for. So in this example, she has a stored procedure that multiple values were passed to as a JSON structure, and then the stored proc would decompose the list of values within the JSON document, and then it would return a result set based on that.
This was.
Am I in the ballpark, James?
We're kind of approaching, well, I think what their question was, and of course this is me asking kind of on behalf of some other person, so there may have been some loss of translation here. But the way I understood it was, they wanted to run one single stored procedure one time and have it return basically hierarchical data, summary rows in the first few set of columns, and then one column at the end of that where that column's contents would contain XML data for the detail rows for that particular row of the summary, and then basically have the sub-report render the detail rows inside each like summary grouping.
Okay.
So
all right.
yeah,
so this is the job for a sub-report. This would be a hard thing to do. You know, to any question like this, you know, is it possible? Yeah, a lot of things are possible. Is it easy? Probably not. Is it optimal? No, probably not. Multi-result stored procedures have always been a difficult thing to consume. Now, in this case, if you're actually using a column in a single result stored proc, so within a single result set, one column is an XML structure that contains essentially a related result set. I will say I don't think that that the product was architected to do this easily.
Yeah,
Could
I didn't
you?
think so.
Yeah.
It's just been bothering me for a few days because like I gave them like 3 or 4 suggestions. I was like, here's other ways I would approach this problem that will make it easier for you to maintain long term, and for other engineers later on who inherit your code to not like pull their hair out over it.
Right.
But I was still going like, gosh, it would be really cool if it could just fire one single store procedure to return the entire data set for the whole report, including all of the summary and the detail rows, rather than having to call a store procedure over and over for every one of the subreports. And I basically suggested the drill through thing to them, and I hope that that's that will actually work for their use case. But yeah, it was just kind of bothering me. I was going like, I should probably ask an expert, and that's one of the reasons I came here today.
Yeah. I'm going to stick with the answer that, yeah, this is probably possible, but it would be really, really, really hard to do. And I don't know how well it would perform. I've been in the situation though, where, I mean, you think about, when you buy a house and they print out, a 200-page contract and it has different sections. How do you produce that report? And it's not an easy thing, but it might be, sub-reports or sections of a report that actually use different data sets. I will say that sub-reports and reporting services it's not a very elegant implementation. Sub-reports are a difficult thing to rein in and manage. The pagination across sub-reports and within sub-reports can really get wonky and difficult to manage. So we could go down a very, very deep rabbit hole explaining or exploring this. All right. Does anybody have any easy questions? And I'm joking with you, James. It's an excellent question, but multifaceted.
I figured you were just yanking my chain there. Thank you. I do appreciate that, because I was going like, man, I really hope I didn't miss something obvious when I was trying to help this person out. No. So I'm glad that it was that you kind of came to the same conclusion I did. So
yeah, it's a hard problem.
Well, we are reaching time here, and so I want to let everyone know, if you do still have some questions, you can go into the user group under discussion or in the event itself, and you can add your questions there, and we will have a look at them throughout the day and at post up at later times as well. But that is available to you. So if you guys want to continue the conversation, you can do that right within the user group itself. And I want to thank everyone for attending today, and thank Paul, our guest speaker, as well. As always, with so much vital information that we need and look for in the community from him. And so again, I appreciate everyone coming out, and look forward to next month's series. So make sure you register.
Thank you, Cookie, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Really appreciate it. Bye all.